there's so much noise to kind of cut through. It's almost the odds are stacked against you, no matter how amazing your idea is. So I suddenly thought, it's kind of a shame because you guys got all these amazing ideas, but they're kind of at risk from this bombardment of noise. So what I really want to do is I really want to help the guys out by clearing that noise and helping you cut through all this noise that's out there to maximise the chances of success in the things you guys are doing. And the good news is that there is help out there. There is a way to kind of create this cut through so that the strength and the kind of excitement of your ideas can shine through. And that power is really the power of brands. So I'm sure you guys have seen these huge adverts here. I thought the EE advert's a good example of something that's just really pretty completely different. And a great way of just, whether you like it or not, kind of just cuts through all the noise. The logo here, we'll come on to talk about the fact that a brand is not a logo in a second, but one of the first things you see here, the logo is kind of vertical, which is really, really unusual. The adverts are vertical again in some instances, which again is really rare. And these colours are kind of odd, and the whole thing just kind of sits a bit funny, but here in Elephant Castle, bam, just hits you right in the face as you come out of the station. And so out of all the brands that I saw that day, this was the one that grabbed me. And it kind of made me think, fantastic, we've got this sort of tool that we can use, these brands. And that's where I want to spend this sort of just under an hour today talking about how you can use this kind of toolkit, how you can use brands to help you kind of cut through the noise and amplify what you're doing. And the good news is that brands can do that. And there's many things that they can do. They can help focus what you guys are doing. They can provide a filter, so they can provide a kind of decision filter. You can quickly decide, yes, no, do I interact with this thing, do I collaborate with these people, and you've got a sort of sounding board that you can quickly work with, rather than always having to kind of think through everything from the kind of first principles. You can actually kind of apply it to a few things. It really works. Earlier we were talking about culture, and brands is something that really helps people capture and kind of build on the culture there. So there's a couple of things here. Focus, we've talked about. Filter, we've talked about. Culture. But ultimately, the thing why brand for me, and why I'm really excited by the potential for brand for you guys, is that it can really help turn an idea into a movement. So it's really something about kind of providing that energy and boosting that kind of momentum and taking something and really propelling it into the world. So one of the things, though, it's got to be different. We've spoken a little bit about that with that picture of EE, but that's something we're going to come back to in a bit. But I thought maybe we could start by just quickly going around the room and asking everybody quick brands they love and why. So, do you guys want to just give a minute to think about that for a second? And then,
Anyone?
Awesome.
I love the Village Taco brand.
Right. Okay.
I know I do. I absolutely love it. I think it says, it absolutely says what it's trying to achieve. Plus, it's got this sort of beautiful tactile. It does. It feels like I want to cuddle it a bit.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. I'm going to make some notes of this. This sounds good. So, what is this? This
is Village Taco. It's Steve's project.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Because you want to cuddle it.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, another brand I love. HTC, because it's not Apple.
Right. Okay. Nice.
Because what?
It's not an iPhone. It's not an Plus, it has Gorilla Glass.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd say Oral-B.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, pretty rude one, but my toothbrush. Partly because my dad's a dentist and that's what he recommends, but also.
Is it really?
Well, yeah, being a belligerent teen, I went and tried everything else. I came to that conclusion myself, but yeah.
I love it too. I love Oral-B. It's something about it. It's friendly, it's approachable, it's a nice brand.
It works, right?
Yeah. Cool. Anyone else?
Yeah, Black Diamond.
Black Diamond.
Because.
Cheese?
Oh no, it's
timing gear.
Timing gear. Because it's So it's basically designed by climate, so that it's got this stripped down aesthetic. It's clean. It just does what it's got to do and does it very well, which you kind of need this time of year.
So the fact it's designed by the people who use it, kind of gives it this. Yeah.
Well, because they're investing their lives, right? So
yeah.
If it breaks, if it fails, they die. If it fails, you die.
Cool.
Hello Facts.
Right, okay, awesome. Tell me a bit about that.
I like them because they make the most repugnant exercise easy to do, which is signing and faxing documents.
Right. You are right, that is a repugnant. So they're taking something really dull and making it a bit.
And that's not really dull, it's repugnant.
Right.
I will literally.
It's not moving from that area.
It would otherwise take me weeks to download, print, sign, and then redigitize and email a document. It would take something that would normally procrastinate for weeks to actually do it in 2 or 3 minutes.
So they're helping you out. You're not because they make something easy.
Yes.
What are they called?
Hello Facts.
You're going to have to say that.
Yeah.
Just a bit more.
Freud. Freud. That's what you mean something.
And evangelizing that.
I have one.
What is that, Brian?
So what is it about the Freud?
What is that brand?
No, what is it? Like,
No, it's a whiskey.
oh.
Because your father is Yeah, what's interesting, it's really hard for me to separate in my mind products I like from the brands I like.
Yeah,
is that like the point?
This is a really interesting thing, because sometimes you've got this real disconnect where there's the product, and the product's either great or really, really terrible, and the brand's amazing. You kind of keep stumbling for it every time. You kind of fall to the brand, and then it turns out that the product
I almost
lets
feel
you
like
down.
I love the product, but I don't want to admit that I'm supporting the brand.
So have you got an example for that sort of thing?
Well, I'm thinking of Barcelona Football Club.
Right.
I just think they're totally incredible, the way they approach things, the way they play. It's kind of artistry, it's like art in the field.
Yeah.
And so I love the Barcelona brand as a result.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything Barcelona did with their brand that made me think that, except for the UNICEF deal where they paid UNICEF to wear
to sponsor the shirts, which is kind of a really. I think that's a nice point.
And that probably took me actually.
Yeah, and the fact they kind of really train up their players and message.
From when they're like 12.
12. Yeah.
So it's actually interesting, like Hello Facts, like the brand itself, I don't really care about, but
Right.
the product is so
So
good
it's
that I love
experience.
the brand. On the flip side, like I like my laptop, which is an Apple. I like the product, but I don't really like the brand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So there are two different things here.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes they kind of move away a little bit, and when they're doing a great job, they're kind of inseparable. But I think that disconnect. So, for example, with Apple, kind of shows there's something wrong there, and I see a lot of non-Apple laptops around, and I kind of, I guess that's all about that open source thing and all that stuff. And that's kind of, but that's a really good example, I think, of kind of this brand that people think they understand, but then there's also this kind of evil genius side to Apple, which is actually they're not making treating everyone like so well.
Yeah, that's the thing about drinks. In terms of being a brand, and like the sort of all these premium drinks brands, but all they are really is a name,
Lifestyle.
and the drink and the association and the different price. Someone at Shivers, a friend of mine worked for Shivers, and he said that their policy was whatever John's Walker was, they were £1 more expensive. That's it. That's the brand. Yeah.
That's the brand promise.
Yeah.
Other brands I like might be like SpaceX and Tesla. Elon Musk. I don't know whether that's because Elon Musk was South African or whether it's just because I love the big crazy ass vision.
Right.
But there's no way I experienced their product. So
Yeah, there's a
I
drink that
really
you're
feel
buying
like
into, or this vision
brand.
I never knew Elon Musk was South African.
Yeah, he went to my school.
That's a big
He used to
deal.
call me.
A brand I used to like
That's interesting.
was Google,
Right. Okay.
and because the fact that they actually said don't be evil,
Yeah.
unfortunately subsequently quite lived up to it, but that was part of their corporate culture, and it meant something to me. You know, and it actually, you know, I was hugely more sympathetic, you know, for, you know, purely emotional reasons rather than rational reasons, because, you know, that was a kind of part of their brain.
It was this kind of dream they put out there, and okay.
So, it seems to me, if Google had never said don't be evil, and they'd done the things that they'd done subsequently, would that still have been perceived as evil, or would that just been the same as everybody else and you wouldn't feel so negative?
No, then it'd be Facebook.
Yeah.
You have to know that. In fact, because that's what Facebook did. We didn't say we weren't going to be evil, and we are. There you are.
Brilliant.
And HBO.
Right.
Love that brand, but generally does like it promises.
It delivers the promise, doesn't it?
Very
You know,
consistent.
You see the kind of thing, and you know it's going to be something as good as the
It's
Wire.
on HBO, I'm pretty much going to watch.
Yeah, fantastic. Whereas this is the difference between that and the Google thing. They said, hey, we're not evil, we're over here, we're brilliant. And actually then you find out all the stuff and they're not delivering on that promise. So there's the kind of, I think that's the disconnect there, which is interesting.
They're like, as I like brands specifically because they're the underdog.
Right, yeah, completely. That's
Or sometimes I want to like the brand. Sometimes they make it very difficult.
I'll be back to the Apple laptop.
Well, no, not Apple, but like Samsung, for example. Like I want to really like Samsung, but I can't stand their phones because they're so ginormous. Like I can't hold it in my hand without and I wouldn't use it with one hand.
Play too.
I want to like them. They're not necessarily
Okay,
underdogs.
great.
So, CERN.
Right, okay, nice. That's an interesting one.
I also say I know the story behind Don't Be Evil, and it's extremely interesting. Maybe.
Oh yeah, no, tell us. That sounds good.
Okay, so it's a bottom-up thing. There was a technical guy, brilliant guy, actually the guy who introduced Gmail to the company, and they were in one of these sessions, you know, discussing what their values were and what their motto should be, and you know, it was like we deliver the best service to them, but, you know, and it was the typical American things, and everybody was bored out of their minds. And he just said out of the blue, "Don't be evil," you know, to shake up the meeting. And a friend of his liked this, you know, they poo-pooed it, no, that won't go, it's too far out, and so on. So what he did is, this friend of his liked it, he spent a week going around very early in the morning and writing "Don't Be Evil" on everybody's whiteboard in the morning in the office. And after that, it just took off. You know.
Wow, I love that.
But ironically, that person now works at Facebook. So.
But it hasn't worked.
Okay, well,
How's that "Don't Be Evil"y thing working out?
Eviliness.
Mark Zuckerberg went around to all the whiteboards and erased the don't.
Okay, brilliant.
Netflix.
So I think this is kind of really interesting because it sort of shows the sort of, you know, there's many different meanings to brands, and people have this kind of emotional affinity to something that probably doesn't really have it back to them, but it sort of takes all these different forms. And so I think it's kind of interesting, really, from what you guys are seeing, because it shows that actually something is really as functional and as kind of cold as electronically signing a fax and then emailing it back can actually be a delightful thing, and there can actually be this real amazing emotion there. And I think that's the kind of key thing here. It's like, you know, sometimes when you're kind of in the trenches with it a little bit, you can't really maybe see the whole picture of your brand. Actually, there are people who are having an emotional experience with what you're doing, and it's really important to kind of acknowledge that. And it's really important to think, how can you kind of take that and how can you build on that? So I think it's just kind of something to kind of lodge and come back to later. Like this idea of there are people out there and they're emotionally experiencing what you're doing, and you can help guide them by what you're doing. You can help guide them by actually kind of what you're promising and versus what you're delivering. So let's come back to that in a little bit. But for the moment, I thought we'd just sort of launch in with a kind of a definition of brand. As we've just seen, there's lots of them out there, but I think this one's useful. So what is a brand? It's an idea that you stand for. So Don't Be Evil is a great example of that. And it's this idea that you stand for is communicated consistently. So this is something you're kind of, I thought the CC thing kind of fits quite well with that. But this is something that you're putting out there. So it's either, you know, with your visual language or your tone of voice, the images you use, how quickly you reply to things. You were talking earlier about the recruitment process. That's an experience of the brand as well, and that consistency that sort of fits with things is really important. And then the final part of this is this idea of it being brought to life by action. And I think this is a really important thing. Often on a brand project, we'll do the strategy, we'll do the design, we'll hand the design files over. Everyone's like, great, we'll put that on the website, we'll start using an email signature, brilliant. And then it kind of, often that's seen as the natural end of a project. Whereas actually, that's kind of really the beginning. At that point, you can start doing things. And it's the doing things that lodge that brand in our minds, that doing things that breathe life into an otherwise rather lifeless brand guideline or strategy or whatever. So it's this kind of doing things, and I think it's tempting to think of maybe brand as a sort of experience and functionality that you're building into a product, but it's so much more than that. And we're going to come on to think of some other ways and some other things around the action, but that's something I'm really, really keen on, this idea of doing, and the brands that do. And I remember being the worst brand presentation I'd ever in. Someone was here with a clicker, and these words are building up in Arial 24 point, and there's about 10 words there. These are our values. This is our brand. And, well, this is just words on a page. It doesn't mean anything to anyone. So, and it's sort of this idea of a brand doesn't live on your hard drive in a document. The brand's out there in the world. Okay, so I think this is a really good working definition for a brand. It's an idea you stand for, communicated consistently, brought to life by action. What a brand isn't, a brand is not a logo. You guys know that. A brand is not a mission statement either. Like I said, it's a dry document that sits on your hard drive. And a brand's not an advert. And it's kind of, sometimes it's easy to get distracted into those worlds and think, hey, cool, we're putting an ad out. Or, awesome, well, I've got this logo, I'll just put a logo on it. Just put a logo. I remember being in my, going to this instructional store. First time I ever saw a laser printer, a laser etcher. And I was working at a company at the time called Onzo. And I stood in line for 2 hours with this laser etcher just before WebEx 2.0 was about to close. Got into the final bit of the laser etcher. And the guy's like, what do you want to etch on your laptop? Logo. And, as soon as he pressed go on that, I suddenly realised that was kind of pretty much the dumbest thing to etch onto the laptop. And actually could have been something that engaged people a lot more. It could have been a phrase or a piece of copy. A piece of copy maybe in the typeface, something recognisable. I think it's got a bit more life to it.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
A brand is also not your corporate culture. There's a tendency for people, especially in smaller companies, to merge the two. Sort of the culture of the organisation becomes sort of a metamorphosis, if you like, of the brand that you're trying to reflect externally. So your corporate culture is very much about your internal, the development of your internal organisation and how you perceive yourself working in a collaborative group. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the same as how you want to project your external image. And sometimes that gets muddy.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to...
Yeah, that's an interesting kind of area, because often you'll get people really wanting the corporate culture to be driving the brand.
Right.
And then you've got the brand people who want to be driving the corporate culture. And that's a kind of,
it's a bit, it can be a bit muddy.
Yeah. I think the key thing here is, and in fact, that kind of played out a little bit by our conversation earlier, when we're all talking about HTC or Apple or Black Diamond. In fact, it's kind of what we say. That's the brand. When you talk about Black Diamond, that's the brand that I understand. I don't read the advert. I'm not deep in their website reading their corporate statement and their mission, blah, blah, blah. I'm hearing what you're saying. And now in my mind, like, awesome, Black Diamond's the one that's designed by climbers. So if I'm ever looking for a harness or a carabiner or whatever, that's the one, because it's got a little story attached to it.
Yeah,
and it's that little story that kind of bounces around the room and that we'll take out and start talking to people. So it's kind of like, what is that little story that you can find for what you're doing? It's that little sentence, that little fragment of a sentence, that little idea. And for Black Diamond, it's this idea. Well, we're all climbers here. And kind of a little bit maybe how North Face started out, and then maybe got too corporate, and those guys sprung out and started Mountain Hardware or whatever. We're all designers, we use our product. And there's nothing kind of cooler than the fact that you put your life in in what you design. That's amazing. So this idea of what they say, and I think kind of, all this amazing technological revolution that's happened in the last 10 years or so has really kind of given a lot of amplification to that. And I think before, there was a kind of the corporate platform was the brand, and now It's all about what people are saying on Twitter, and it's all about what people are saying on Facebook. And personally, I think that actually that's maybe kind of swung as far as it will that way. And all these endless social media campaigns about voting who should go here on their next holiday, or what's going to get written on the Skittles homepage, and all that stuff. Actually, what we're seeing is that people are kind of a little bit too busy for some of that stuff. And although I love Skittles, and when I want a sweet, I might choose them, I don't really care what colour the next one is, or whatever. So I think that's kind of, it's an interesting dynamic that's happened, and I wonder where it's going to go from there. I think there could be a little bit more sort of autonomy maybe that's coming in. Okay, brilliant. So now what I want to do is I want to talk about sort of 5 different ideas about how to build a brand. So we've talked a little bit about what a brand is. And when I'm talking to, sometimes when we're talking to clients or talking to other people about brands, you kind of really got to take a step right back, and you've got to start with, okay, so if you're going to find a brand, you've got to find something you love. And then you've got to find something that's a real need, and then it's about matching those two things together. But with you guys, it's already obvious from reading your bios and all the amazing things you're up to, you found stuff you love, you've got that already, and you found people's needs, and you've got that already. So kind of some of that stuff. So we can just jump in, I think, and actually to kind of, you're already doing your amazing things. How can we make those brands stronger? So for me, the most important thing in this context is be different. And Martin Neumeier talks a lot about this in his book Zag. I don't know if anyone has looked at or read, but I'd really recommend as a great way of kind of, he really dives into a lot of depth about how to be different and how to make a different brand. Martin Neumeier. I'll send some links around for a reading list afterwards, so don't worry about making notes. But this is the key thing. If you've got 1 second to stand out, HelloFax versus another one, HelloFax, just the name starts to talk about it, and it kind of begins to say that things are a little bit different. So I was reading this book to my 2-year-old the other day, and he loves it. I don't know if there are any Dr. Seuss fans here in the audience, but I'm a big Dr. Seuss.
Could you recite it, Steve?
And I don't think there are many things you find kind of Dr. Seuss agreeing with the Harvard Business Review. But actually, this is kind of one of the things, this is one of the definite overlaps in the Venn diagram of Dr. Seuss and HBR. Because this is, the places you'll go. And here's a little guy, he's walking around town, and it's kind of busy, and there's lots of things going on. And he's just a little bit lost, and it's just a bit too crowded for him. So he heads out into the open. And it says, it's open there, in the wide open air. And I think this is what this is all about, being different. You can be different. You can get out there when no one else is. Suddenly, you've got everyone's attention. Whatever you do, people are looking. Whereas if you're back in town, whatever you do, everyone's looking somewhere else, and they're all too busy. They're all being distracted, like in the picture of Elephant and Castle. Whereas bam, when you're in the open space, you can do, you've got so much more potential. So there's a whole book called Blue Ocean Strategy that's about this. If you read kind of a lot of sort of, seminal strategy docs all about doing things differently. But I think Dr. Seuss sums it up in 2 pages earlier on in that book. And I think this is a really cool thing. It's like, what can you do that's different? With your core functionality, with your brand, with how you name it. This is something like words in a stick of rock that run all the way through your brand, from how you think about it, how you talk about it, what name you've chosen, all the way through. So this is kind of pretty much, if you're going to do one thing from what I'm talking about now, this is the one. Be different. I was walking out from the station a couple of days ago, and I saw this little baggie on the street. I presume it's for some illicit material. But the fact it's got an Uzi printed on it kind of made me think, oh, that's weird. And I never really noticed those baggies, but this one's got an Uzi on it. I thought, that stands out, that's different. Does anyone know about this beer company? So there's a whole kind of revolution in beer brewing going on, and it started in the States 15 years ago or more, this kind of microbrew. But it reached the shores of the UK about 5 years ago. And there's a massive microbrew phenomenon going on, which is super exciting. And these guys are leading the charge, Brewdog. They're 2 dudes from Scotland, and they are just turning the industry on its head by being completely different. Not only is their kind of their name so far away from the kind of beards and kind of sandals of old ale drinking, but it's also super far away from the kind of hipster, super kind of cool thing. They're just doing what they love doing, and it's just awesome seeing what they do. So they have brewed the world's most expensive beer. Here it is here in this taxidermied squirrel bottle you can buy for £1,500. Not what beer comes in the squirrel. Yeah. Stop buying the Freud, stop buying this stuff. But they also make the world's strongest beer, about 35%. So they're doing all these things which are so completely different, they just grab your attention. And of course, they probably only sold a few squirrels. They mostly sell their other beers. So they mostly sell this beer, which is Punk IPA. And that's just a fantastic beer. It's great. It's not that real American IPA. It's a type of taste that until a few years ago was kind of unheard of over here. And they're blazing the trail with that. But I think this picture's great because I'm not sure if you can see, but this beer's kind of illuminated and it's standing on a mound of broken Stella Artois bottles. And this is the thing about being different. If you kind of take being different to the extreme, then it's picking a fight. And it's picking a fight with someone who's bigger and badder than you. And there's actually nothing you can really do that's better than that. If these guys were picking a fight against a fellow microbrewery, it would just seem really kind of mean and nasty. Like, who's going to pick a fight against, another microbrewery? But these guys are boosting the bad guys. Okay.
So Ben, like these guys, Maverick, maybe like a Maverick brand in the big industry. How did they then? I don't know these guys. How did they then turn that sort of Maverick way of operating into actually being seen?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So they started off pretty small. They, on their website, there's pictures of them in their car park selling beer and this sort of stuff. And there's a couple of things going on here, I think, which is really interesting. One, that. Just name it, design it, everything is totally different. It's over here. You're not trying to go for the same people. You're going for the crazy kids. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing is they're doing these. This is marketing. This isn't really brewing. I mean, it is brewing, but it's kind of getting out there. When they made the strongest beer, they put a press release out that said, "This is going to cure binge drinking." Because no one's going to drink very much because they'll fall over after half a bottle. Because it's 35%. And then all the press picked up on this and went wild. And so, they're very good at kind of they strapped some kegs to the front of an ocean liner. There was, brewing on the bottom of the sea floor. And they're doing all this type of stuff. They just love what they do. And I think they're having fun with it.
Yeah, attention as well.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But that also must take a lot of effort.
Yeah.
It's not, it may be just fun, but fun like that takes a lot of effort.
Sure thing. So you kind of they set their business up so they can go and do that. Yeah, they're hard to find.
It must take a lot of effort, but it's also the crazy ideas that you have when you've had 3 whiskies, right?
But the difference to that is the crazy ideas of 3 whiskies, and then it's like the 2 or 3 months after that day to make it happen, to throw out the bad idea. That's what I'm saying. It takes a lot of work to do. That's my one question.
I think it's a great question. So I think what one of the answers is, they set it up so they can do that. So they set it up so the operations are running, and they're doing amazing stuff. So they did this open they raised a bunch of money through selling shares, but they did it in such a way that they didn't maybe go to the stock market, but you could buy them online and sort of thing. But so they're doing kind of, and it's this idea about activities. It's the doing. Their brand isn't sitting in some document or on a poster in their office. Their brand's out there and it's getting people talking. But they've sort of set it up so that they're free from the operations so they can go and do that. And then, you can imagine them tinkering in the brewery. Oh man, we just found a way to make this taste like bananas or whatever. And it's that type of thing that they're kind of free to do. But yeah, I think when you're kind of running with less resources, that's a good question. But I think
that one could, if there's like a pie of activity and you say, I want to spend 100% of my activity making the product I make, you're actually only running half an organisation there. Half of the organisation is getting the word out. Otherwise, the 100% effort you're putting in is pointless. So it is a lot of work, but it's half the work. It's not like an optional add-on to your product about it.
Yeah, exactly. And these guys are just going.
This is part of the beer making.
This is doing the thing. Yeah, completely. They've just set up a new factory. It's wood powered. They're getting all these bars open. So this is I think this is a really good story about that. This, I think, is noise, and this is something different. So this is 2 coffee brands. This is Lavazza, this ridiculous advert of some Italian people drinking espresso in the underwater crypt of somewhere in Italy, and it just seems so kind of expected. Whereas this is an amazing coffee roastery from London called Square Mile. They've made an espresso blend that tastes like sweets. It's super, super sweet. They designed it so it tastes completely different. And that's kind of cutting through. And I think that's about being different, not playing by the rules, not thinking you've got to be Italian, drinking espresso underneath a cathedral in Rome. Actually, let's make coffee taste like sweets. Awesome. I'm sure you guys know about that.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, so I think this is just fantastic, and you'd never think that I was in a technology brand from looking at that, and then you hear the name and Raspberry Pi. It's just such a kind of delightful and different name. This idea of kind of this attitude of difference just going all the way through the brand, I think is really, really nice, and but sort of setting it up to begin with, bam, I'm going to call it something just pretty weird. And it makes Arduino, I don't know that much about the technology, but I guess it's kind of similar to Arduino. It makes Arduino seem a little bit kind of normal by comparison. And this is the one you can attach to Lego and it's all great. So, and Martin Neumeyer mentioned this in his book, and I think this is a really great test. He calls it the only test. And so if you're going to be different, you've got to be the only, right? So if you're the only, it's a really good way of thinking about what you are. So kind of, your brand is the only something that somethings. So, for example, Brewdog, the only microbrew that makes crazy ass beers for people who love taxidermy. So it's a nice kind of little test, and I think it's. I think with this talk, there's some elements to kind of get stuck in, and I would love to kind of help be a sounding board for those in the one-to-ones or talk about this afterwards. There probably isn't time to go through them kind of in a more workshopy way right now, but this is something to kind of key up, and I'll send this deck around afterwards. And this is something to kind of think about, maybe fill in the blanks, kind of like, okay, what is it that you can be the only of? Okay, cool. So the second thing, so the first thing was be different, the second thing, be relevant. And this comes down to people. And brands are all about people. And technology really is all about people too, because if people aren't using technology, then you're in trouble. So, who is the brand for? That's the first question. Have you got a clear idea of who these guys are? Have you got a picture of them on your wall? Have you built up a persona of them so you know what newspaper they read, what soft drink they drink, what they do on Friday nights, who they're spending time with, who the competition are in their eyes, and why they're choosing you or not choosing you? And who's your brand not for? And why isn't it for them? That's good. It's good to have people that you're not for. It's good to say, you know what, you probably won't like our brand. You probably don't like coffee that tastes like sweets. So go and buy some of that. That's cool. So it's good to sort of say no. Saying no is a really strong thing. Because you can't have a brand for everybody, because then it turns into Ford or something that's kind of a little bit, there's nothing there. You want to sort of say, yeah, our brand's for you. And unfortunately, that's not for you. So, building up these kind of personas, it's great to get a picture of these people and to kind of put some faces to them. And it could start with some research, and this is the thing, but actually you can get out there and do this stuff pretty quick, pretty cheap and sort of pretty quick. So you can get out there on the street, you can start talking to people. You can video that, you can build up a little thing. You can begin to do a survey on your website. You can talk to people as they're using your product. You can do this type of thing. You can build up this picture of who the people are who love your brand. And it's kind of interesting to look at the edges. It's kind of interesting to kind of take that to the people that use HelloFax 5 times a day. What do they think about HelloFax? They must love it so much. Or people who are kind of really kind of on the sort of edge of obsession, say with climbing or something. What are those guys using? Are they modifying their Black Diamond stuff? Have they moved on to something else because that's got a bit mainstream? So keeping an eye on these guys and building them up. And then kind of the key thing here is you're creating something that's very objective. So you're creating something that allows you to talk about these people without getting too personal or defensive. And it's super handy when you're talking about. I mean, you guys are all, you guys know. All this stuff kind of sits with user testing and user-centered design and all this type of stuff. But I think personas is something you can really borrow from user-centered design, and it's a great kind of way of saying, okay, what would this guy think of this? What would that guy think of that? And then you can kind of play that out in a conversation where you're not thinking, well, I like it because it's purple, which is always a bad thing. So here are some, I think here are some brands that have really kind of centered on this kind of relevance thing, and they've really found a need. And it's kind of interesting, I think, this collaborative consumption thing that has just really taken right off. And Zipcar and Airbnb are kind of brands that have found a need, but they've kind of abstracted their brand out from that and made it human and relevant and interesting. So Airbnb is sort of saying, like, oh, it's really interesting because they're using all this surplus space and this, it's actually packaged it up around something that's relevant for this crowd of kind of well-heeled urbanites who love going to other cities to check out culture and go clubbing and museums and stuff. And the whole thing's kind of designed for them. It's not really designed around the original thing that those guys saw in the market. Likewise for Zipcar, they must have seen some economies of scale and fleets distributed across the city. They're not talking about that. They're saying wheels when you need them. So this whole idea about being relevant to the people, you can only really do that when you've got an idea of who they are. Cool. So that's the second thing about there, being relevant. Third thing, be simple. I don't know about you, but I love simple things. Less can go wrong. It's kind of a more delightful experience. Everything's getting so hectic nowadays that actually sitting down with something really simple can be a great thing. Does anyone use this app? This is an app. Maybe you guys don't use it because I don't see so many apples around here, but this is an app that runs on iPad and also on Mac, and it's a writing app. And on the iPad sort of iteration of it, all you can do is type. There's no settings. There's no preferences. There's nothing. You can't change the typeface. You can't do anything like that. All you can do is type. And it's a really kind of it's a beautiful thing because they've stripped all that stuff out. They've realised that that's not necessary. And it's a typewriter. Exactly. And I think you can do the same thing, you can do the same thing for the brand. You can take all of that stuff out. You don't need to ask people what their favourite colour for the next Skittles is. You can just do the thing and keep it nice and simple. So I think that's a nice example of that. Has anyone been here? This is Schiller's Wine Bar in New York City. So it's run by the guy who set up Pastis, which is another famous bar over there. And I love it. I love being there because it's a great buzz. But what I really love about it is the wine list, which is decently good. So if you're a cheap date, you can go for option number 1. And if you're feeling fancy, you can go for option number 3. And it's just something that's kind of, rather than the confusion and maybe, actually when faced with a wine list, people feel a bit inadequate. Like, oh my God, I don't know, is that a Merlot or a blah blah or whatever? Bam, just hit them between the eyes with cheap, decent, and good. And actually, kind of, that's what it looks like on the bottles on the tables. And it's, that's again this kind of little talking point, this little bouncing ball that you give the brand, and kind of that's what bounces around. And that's why this is, one of the really well-known bars in New York, because it's got this little story that goes with it about these things. Muji is another great brand that really just embraces the simplicity thing. It's one of my favourite brands, and it's they're not afraid to do things super simple. And actually, this kind of takes a lot of confidence to say, we're not going to offer this in black, guys. We'll just call it white. Or actually, we're just going to make this really plain looking stapler. It doesn't do anything apart from stapler. And that's the thing. But actually, that takes a lot of confidence. It takes a lot of confidence to say no to people who are clamouring for different features and all this type of stuff. Yeah.
So the question I have about quite a lot of this is, it seems the key thing is this the focus, right? I mean, the brand, all the other stuff that comes from the labelling, the taxidermic squirrels. I mean, it's kind of circular. Some of those just represent a feeling you have, but it's ultimately this focus. Or you said like that line, like Airbnb have had to refine down to 5 words.
Yeah.
And that's a huge kind of process of throwing out or trying to convey.
Absolutely. It takes, there's that great quote from Oscar Wilde, sorry, I didn't write you a short letter. I only had time for long.
Right. And so how does that, the squirrel example, I don't know, like one question I'd be interested in is, when do people, people must make mistakes. They must go for something. I don't know, even in Airbnb. And my question is, does that evolve out of the product? Like in those technological experience, does the branding come after they've got a user base that they've established via their product, and then they distill that into the brand? Or I'm just kind of wondering the way it goes.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I mean, there's some products which are very brand heavy. I don't like coffee, where you'd kind of really go out and say, what audience are we trying to get? Whereas in Airbnb, I guess they experimented quite a lot, and now they've got a professional team doing that, and they kind of distilled their experience down.
Well, I think they're on their seventh iteration of their product. Airbnb is the seventh going out, isn't it? So they got to know kind of what people are looking for and what the
And
needs are.
Couchsurfing never quite made it in the same way, even though it was a very similar but slightly different concept.
Yeah.
So how do people iterate through that cycle? At what point do they bring, what point, like, I don't know, the beer guys, I assume they started out at car parks, and that now this kind of, like, I don't know, they even got that kind of slightly cool logo that, like, falling out of bed with your hair towels probably takes a while to get.
Yeah.
Did they, I mean, I don't know in that case, but is there a point when they engaged someone who properly did this for them, or where they... where do you go from, like, we're just having fun, but now we're also trying to distill that into a really tight message to people?
Yeah, so this is about positioning, isn't it? This is about where you want to be in the market. So this is about positioning yourself in people's minds as to how you relate to your competition. And that is something that kind of iterates and you get closer to it, I think. But it's actually kind of quite a fixed thing. There you are, this is what you stand for. And this comes back to this idea of brand as an idea that you stand for, because it's that doesn't really change. Your tagline might kind of alter a few times as you realise there's a better way of writing it, or you realise that there's a new feature that you've kind of slightly changed as your proposition. But it's that core idea that doesn't change. Does that?
It's periodically you sort of just reassess, don't you?
Yeah.
As an organisation or as a leadership team, especially, of what you feel like your message is, and that could come with a change of identity, an updated site, and that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to
refresh,
talk to people again, and clarify things. And even with like knowing you, Rufus, for the last 2 years, I think from a third party perspective, I've seen you do that as well. Kind of reassess and the message changes and becomes purer and more clear.
Yeah, I think it's a conundrum. I think it's a conundrum that sort of sits in branding. Like, do you just block everything out and just kind of carry on going with that thing, or do you actually kind of listen a bit more and change a bit more? And there's a sort of consistency, but a flexible consistency, I suppose, that's out there. It depends. I think really is a kind of slight get out good answer. Okay, cool. So again, there's this kind of simplicity, this kind of calm thing that these guys are going for. And one of my favourite quotes for simplicity is this guy, John Mader. John Mader, the guy from, he's the principal of Rhode Island Design. He's got this great book called Simplicity. It's like the 10 Laws of Simplicity, which I really recommend. It's a great book. And he's a designer, and he talks about kind of the first thing you can do is just get rid, so just cut stuff out. And he goes through these kind of laws about moving things away and saving people time. That feels like simplicity. But he comes back to this kind of final summing up quote, which is, simplicity is subtracting the obvious and adding the meaningful. And I think that's kind of a really lovely thing to do. And it's a lovely thing to do for a brand. Don't talk about the obvious things. There's things like quality or dependency and this type of thing. You can communicate those in other ways, but you don't need to talk about them necessarily. Add the meaningful things, add those emotional things, because it's those that people relate to in a brand. It's how you feel when you're using Halifax. It's how you feel when you see the HTC brand and you feel like, oh, this is great. There's a little doodle on the side of the box. It's awesome. And, it's that feeling that's what brand is. It's not the obvious stuff. So I think that's a really nice, again, that's kind of a nice kind of
Is it okay to define yourself by what you're not?
I think it's dangerous, personally. I think it's fun for a little bit, but I think it's dangerous. And it makes me think of some, it makes me think of those people who are always anti-everything, and then suddenly they run out of things to be anti, and then they don't know anything to talk about.
What's an example of a brand that defines that's about what they're not? Just curious if you know off your head. Trying to think what that would feel like.
I suppose Writer does that app. So was that its ad copy that you put up there? The Writer app?
I think they're defining themselves by kind of simplicity of experience for Writer rather than the fact they're not another brand. But I think you see it a lot in American ads often target their competitor because they can legally do that. We can't do that here, but they'll often target their kind of leading competitor in an ad. But as a
Oracle
brand,
does
and
this. Oracle does this.
Right.
We're much better than IBM. Like they're constantly doing that.
yeah, I think that's kind of, personally I think that's not such a good, because then, when that situation changes, what are you left to talk about?
Yeah,
There can't be a position.
If you start to mention other brands, I think it takes away from your brand, right? If
Yeah,
you say,
exactly.
we're not this, then you enter that other brand into the person's mind, I think, to some extent, whether that be good or bad, I don't know.
Yeah.
The Nationwide Building Society is doing it here at the moment.
Right,
Saying
okay.
we're a building society, we don't have shareholders.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, which is the US too.
Yeah, just interesting.
And that sort of works, I think.
Yeah. But that's the prevailing climate, I guess, isn't it? Okay, so I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to have to speed through a couple of things here. But again, another way to get to simplicity is to say no, and I think this is something we've touched on a couple of times. But saying no actually kind of cuts things right out. 30-70 Signals as a brand experience in mind are quite good at doing that in their products and not giving everyone everything that they want. But that's another way to get to simplicity. Okay, so the 4th out of 5 points for me is about telling your story. And this is such a cliche that I sort of thought twice about putting it in. Because everyone always says, I've got to tell a story. Brand's about story, or marketing's about telling a story. So I actually kind of put it in because I wanted to show a couple of examples very quickly about brands that tell a story very well. So I don't know if you guys know Hyatt Denim. It's set up by the guy who set up Howie's. Do you know Howie's? Okay, cool. So, so Howie's is a brand that's been going, I guess, about 15 years, and it was all about, it's a clothing brand. It's all about getting out to the outdoors. It's kind of very much aimed at people who live in the city but wanted to live in the coast of Wales. And it's kind of selling this kind of dream. Like, hey, you work at PwC, that's cool. You live in Clapham, but really you're kind of your mind on Gower Peninsula and you're surfing every day. And the guy that set that up, this amazing guy, David Hyatt, and he has now gone on to set up this company called Hyatt Denim. And while he ran Howie's, he was brilliant at telling a story. He's an ad guy, and he's great at telling a story there. But at Hyatt Denim, I think it's an interesting example. So this is their homepage. Does it print out their homepage? Our town's making jeans again. So he lives in this place called Cardigan in Wales. It's very sort of very far away from the west coast of Wales. It was a big cloth-making town, but it's fallen on hard times the last 20 years or so. His purpose, his mission is, we're going to get this town making jeans again. And you can do that by buying these jeans, because they're made in that town of Cardigan. They send them to you in the post. There's a little story. You can see here, so shop, story, today, films, love. So the second thing on the thing after shop is story. So you click on that, and you get these little stories here. So these are 4 that they're majoring on at the moment, but the user manual is a kind of log pile. Do one thing well is their kind of rallying cry. The history tag is an amazing thing. It's like a little barcode on your jeans. Every time something happens to them, like you get a cut or you rip them or if something happens, you can scan the barcode and leave a little story online, and you can come back and find them later on. So this is kind of like the jeans are a story as well as the brand story. So those guys, and this comes down to detail. So often kind of, everyone says, your brand's got to be about story, you've got to tell a story. And then you're sitting there thinking, what on earth can I talk about? What story have I got? But I think the example of these guys is actually, you just talk about what you're doing. You talk about the details that are in your product. You talk about a problem you're trying to solve in your product and how you solved it with the code. Or you talk about a supplier situation and there's a little story there. So this kind of idea of the long tail for products and whatnot actually I think really works for stories, because you can talk about bottle tops as for the brewing example, you can talk about bottle tops. Now 99% of people don't care about that kind of stuff, but someone has enough bottle tops. They're going to find it, they're going to think that's great. And so this is about finding those little details and talking about them. Innocent is a brand that, the fruit juice brand, and like them or not, and I guess I feel they're a little bit overplayed in these type of talks, but this is really nice in terms of details. These are some gloves they make for their fridge stackers, so you don't get your hands cold when you're stacking their juices. Oh, okay, sorry. I'm going to switch to this one. This is a coffee brand talking about it. It's my favourite brand, Field Notes, in terms of details and telling stories. And then this idea of only just if I can just finish on 2 seconds. Only you can tell your story. So just be you. Just talk as your voice. Say the things you say. Write the things you write. Don't worry about sounding like anyone else. Sound like you. Don't be evil came from someone sitting in a meeting, being there. And that's where the stuff comes from. The confidence to say that stuff and be you is the most important thing you can bring to your brand. So don't be shy about that.
Hey Ben, can I make a comment on that? The MailChimp actually has.
Yeah.
So it's so have your own voice. It kind of sounds like it's just something that happens. For good brands, it's actually extremely deliberate, and they spend a lot of time thinking about what is their voice.
Yeah.
MailChimp has this brilliant tone and voice guide online where they explain every touch point that they have with customers, and they give examples of like this is the MailChimp way of talking to our customers.
Yeah, fantastic.
And it's really.
I think they're a great brand. I love MailChimp, but it's a little bit like Roadfax. They've taken something very boring, sending a newsletter out, and made it this delightful experience, and people love that brand. As it is. So I've run out of time. So this is going to be my last point, but we'll talk about that. Okay, cool. So building a tribe. Okay, awesome. The thing is, you can't really build a tribe. You can only serve a tribe. So you can't sort of think, hey, I'm going to get a tribe over here. You can actually just find people and do things for them, and then in return, they might stick around and help you out too. But don't rely on that. So serving a tribe. Who are your tribe? Great example of this is Nike. Way back in the day, their number 2 started writing letters to their fanatical users of their shoes, the people who are the real runners, who really run their stuff. And this guy just wrote them a letter, they lo and behold, they write back. So then he'd write them another one, and they write back. And then this whole amazing kind of exchange happened, where he was writing to the people who use their products the most, and gained this incredible insight into what people thought about the brand, what people thought about the products. And it's only really by kind of doing that stuff and sending that sort of thing out. So I mean, I think Nike's an amazing brand, and that's a great example of taking that time. You sort of, when you're talking about it's the 50% is doing the business, that must have taken so much time, but actually it was worth it because they can really get some real nuggets. You know the brand GoRuck? They make backpacks. They make these bulletproof backpacks. They're guaranteed for life. But the other thing they do is this thing called the GoRuck Challenge, which is some crazy orienteering, kind of pseudo-military orienteering around your city, with some impossible goals. And that's the thing they're doing for people who love their backpacks. It doesn't relate at all to the backpack itself, but it's something you can do to get involved with the brand.
I'm really sorry, we really do.
Okay, cool. That's it. Well, I look forward to what time do you guys later on?
Thank you so much.